Now let's move on to ranges. Calling 3 bets. This is an area where mistakes are often made. And here, I will be carefully looking at each individual position against almost every single other position in a very detailed manner. And in this case, we will be looking specifically at the earliest position against the ranges of cutoff button and so on. When we are out of position and now we are looking at hands that are profitable to call with, what I mean is we have categories of hands. Let's say Radwin Sun Grand 2 top, which has a plus of his call. In this case, for example, for Ace Queen 1.02 EV Polo. Also for King Queen, Call Jack, Ace Jack. Here that is, and also we have a category 0. His calling range is 8s, 9s, Jack 10, Queen 10, Ace Jack, and so on. Accordingly, based on this data, we will look at how both parts of your game are played out, plus how your 3-bet calls against the blinds are played using the same principle, plus his hands that show a profit when calling according to his range, and hands with 0, his calls to scare him. Accordingly, the first position is your UTG. And here we see that overall you have a positive win rate when you call. Our goal here is simply not to play worse than folding. And the next category is when you're on UTG, and here you have draws with 0 EV calls. Absolutely all of them that you play as a call, I can't really break them down here because the sample size is very small. But the hands are performing better than folding, and accordingly that's already a pretty big plus. Now we look at plus EV calls against the blinds. Everything is good here as well, really great, and hands with 0 EV calls too. And here we also see a win rate better than folding, so there's nothing that needs to be changed here. I would leave it as it is, but again, the decision is yours, so these are just recommendations for you, since this is for you. 7 max, 6 max. I've reviewed all 3 positions, or rather both UTG positions, and EP. Because overall there are not that many hands in play, so I will just move on from this point, and we will then proceed to look at your calls from the Member of Parliament, which are quite important for our discussion. Let's look at MP. Your situation is a bit worse here, but that could just be a sampling error. Maybe it's just one of the hands, like in fact it is. This ace at home. Very much at home. The 10 just happened to end up at home overall, but I think there shouldn't be a 10 at home here. Often, this probably should just be a 4-bet. For the most part, if we look at MP versus button, then a 10 at home shouldn't really end up here. In the call, your opponent's 3-bet should be higher than 10.5 for an ace at home with a 10. In this case, it was played through a call. That is, I don't think the opponent will have a 3-bet higher here, although, by the way, the opponent does have a rather high 3-bet, so maybe that's possible, but with a sample size of 1500, it might be completely inaccurate. So that's why this kind of conditional cooler resulted in a loss. Here you also have to hide the ballet. Apparently this is a flash of flash, so it's also worth looking at the ranges. 4-betting in heads up is often more likely just to play through a 4-bet than through a call. So let's move on. Next, let's look at the hands that are called with 0. And you in here for 26. Overall, it's genuinely hard to say anything and play positively. It's not really profitable, and it cannot be considered truly representative, that is to say real. Now here we're looking at the MPCEP in these blinds, and we see that we have some kind of drop in win rate. We can look at what caused it. Again, maybe it was just some hand that was played badly. You should also pay attention to 3-bets from the big blind. That is, when you get 3-bet from the big blind, usually it's going to be a very narrow range, and people really don't 3-bet enough. Calling from the big blind is almost impossible here, so you should tighten up a bit. In other words, if we look at the game according to the solver, in this case you're in the MP position. Because it's a short-handed table, a raise from the big blind and a king at home here is definitely a fold. But if you consider that the 3-bet range there is say 7%, well, let's say it's 7% here. Here I have no further arguments. Most likely, everything is fine here. And actually, regarding the hand itself, let's talk about the play. That is, it's unlikely. A flush is going to be played this way, although it could be played, but only the nut flush, and it would be better to have some kind of blocker, like the ace of diamonds here. So in this case, you need to understand that the ace of this suit is not here. King of clubs, queen of clubs, most likely. And you're not blocking this strength with your hand. With the ace of spades, the only hand you're blocking is this narrow range of strong hands, and at the same time, you're blocking the folding range, meaning things like pocket kings, queens, or hands like king queen or queen jack. There can't be kings or queens here since you're blocking them, which are the hands that might sometimes fold on the turn. But if I were you, I would analyze this hand so you don't end up in such situations. And in general, this type of hand, because they can lead to losses. Next hand, here we have a limp, 3-bet, check, check. Overall, you can check, check, or you can bet. Neither is a mistake, specifically bet, bet. In the sense that you can immediately tell if your opponent check raises you, he has some strength, and your hands are too weak to continue. That's why you could have played bet, bet as well. With a second check, you'll most likely have jack 10 in your range, and for the opponent, 9s or 8s. Some queen x hands. I think you can easily play bet here. Yeah. Overall, it's pretty good, but I feel like the sizing isn't value oriented, meaning there's no clear understanding. What are we trying to value bet with this sizing if we're playing for value? For example, with ace queen. Some king queen hands. And that's probably it. If you have ace queen, then there are only 2 combinations of king queen left. I honestly think that this hand would have played out a bit better through a flop bet. Either a bet or a small bet on the turn and a shove on the river, because then you'll be representing both flushes and full houses. And so that would have created a more dangerous situation for your opponent. So I did digress a little here. That's what we end up with. Plus his hands against the blinds in 0. And in hands against the blinds, you push, plus maybe it's just the category, plus his hands get overplayed, although connectors are present in both cases. Now let's move on to tofu out of position. Accordingly, Kotov is out of position here, and only against the button can he end up in this spot. Most likely, I might have the wrong filter because the calling range is probably wider than I'm assuming. Although, by the way, no, the range actually matches quite well. So, regarding his hands, except for the queen, the rest act as they should. You can just not highlight them and leave them as is. But here, our connectors shouldn't be called, nor should ace-5, so overall, this is the entire range of your and his calls. And if, accordingly, you invert it, take queen-jack, connectors, 10-5 here is generally fine as well. And that's why I don't see any problems here. And hands with 0. EV here is also generally good. A positive win rate when you call a 3-bet, that's really great, that's very good. Calling 3 bets against the blinds is also excellent overall. So I can't really find fault with anything here. And 0-0. His hands also play very well against the blinds. Next, we have the button position, and the button specifically against each position, SB and BB. This is because, as a rule, the BB should have a polarized range, while the SB has a linear one. And against the SB, here too, you're playing profitably, definitely a real machine. Again, this is all just about calling 3 bets, that's when you're not playing. 4 bets and overall. I'm really surprised that the results here are positive. Seriously, respect for that. And now, against the BB, because I don't see any mistakes here. Maybe a few against the BB, but again, nothing too critical. Again, as I said, this could just be the variance of a single hand or maybe 2 hands that brought you into the negative. So this is exactly the kind of polarized 3 bet I was talking about. The bet looks really strong, especially since you have the 10 of hearts blocking a lot of flush draws. It's hard to fold here, but a call will most likely be about 0, and this is the second hand. A call is good for us since we block ace-jack and opponents usually only freeze up with ace-queen or ace-king. There are a lot of draws that didn't complete. But here, you need to understand that your opponent is mostly capable of bluffing you, at least in this particular spot. It looks like he knows how to do it. Well, overall there aren't that many bluffs, so it's hard to judge here, but in a vacuum, I would also call. But when you look at the field analysis, you'll probably notice some tendencies. But overall, there is nothing criminal here either. No, the range plays out well, that is, and here it is. 0. His hands? Here, of course, I think there is something to look at why this is happening. You may be overdoing it. And here, precisely on the button against VV, it is worth paying attention to some specific hands. The pockets are a plus here. 3-2 should not be there. Connectors, here of course the connectors really let you down. Should they even be called at all? That's a good question, and we'll see the answer to it now, as well as about the connectors. This is not the category that should always be in your calling range. So it's worth paying attention, but the sample size is very small. This could simply be a variance error, meaning just these hands. In general, this also shouldn't really be happening. Ace-7, you called a standard c-bet with it. There's no reason to do that. So if someone has a 3-bet of 16, then they will have a high fold to 4-bet, so you can 4-bet calmly, but I think that 16 is not super high, like 13. A standard person typically has 16. Sorry, that's all for now regarding the topic of calling 3 bets in poker. We've covered the essential aspects of this particular strategy.